Being raped as a child, being beaten, being abused, not having shelter, clothes, or shoes. Watching a loved one, a biological family member, beaten in front of you. Having a loved one ripped from the family, being sentenced to prison, or pulled far away through deportation proceedings. These are some of the things that cause adverse childhood experiences. Cedars or Kaiser and Dr. Filippi and Dr. Anda wrote a journal called Adverse Childhood Experiences Survey. And in that survey, there were 10 most prevalent types of trauma caused to children. They categorized them in 2 different categories: personal and familiar or family. Now, in these analysis, it said things like physical, emotional, or sexual trauma, physical or emotional neglect. They cause trauma to be realized in children. And the most profound portion of that assessment and analysis was when they concluded that ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, are in fact preventable. Now, I personally, through my experience, I learned that human development happens very much akin to an astronaut on a trajectory. Here's what I mean. If an astronaut is off course down here, before they get anywhere near their intended directional destination, they will be thousands and thousands of miles off course. Conversely, if that astronaut is able to maintain their trajectory, go up and break the Earth's atmosphere into outer space, and only slightly deviate, ever so slightly, they are still going to be hundreds of miles off course. Human development says, however old you are when you experience a major life-altering event, you will be permanently shifted for life, absent outside influence, fixing that trajectory of your life. That emotional trauma shows up in a diverse amount of ways. Let me tell you from personal experience, I learned this to be true. My journey started way back in 1964. In southeastern Pennsylvania, about 45 minutes away from where the Amish are. Horses and buggies, no electricity, well water. That's where the Amish lived. Where I lived, everything is black and white, including yours truly. My father stands 6'7" in height. He grew up in West Philadelphia, shooting hoops on the inner city playground. He met my mother, who stands 5'3". She is Italian and East Indian. My mom and dad met on a blind date. They fell in love, and my mom had what they call that Sophie's choice decision to make. Either A, marry my father, be mother, matriarch of her family, or B, take that second option. And that was to follow the dictate of her mother, who brought her into this world to be a nun. The fact that I'm standing here before you, you kind of can deduce that my father and my mom met, fell in love, and got married. I have one other sibling. He is my elder. And he does not suffer from the maladies that I suffer, nor do I suffer from those likened to him. I remember being in the 2nd grade. remember getting off the school bus, going to the front door of my parents' home, and I'm pulling on the front door frantically. Mom, open the door. Mom, open the door. Mom, open the door. She's like, Keith, what's wrong? I'm like, Mom, open the door. When she unlatches the door from the inside, I come barreling through. My mom says, Keith, what's wrong with you? I'm like, Mom, leave me alone. She's like, Keith, baby, what's wrong with you? I was like, Mom, just leave me alone. And I asked my mom a life-defining question at that moment. I said, Mom, am I white? She says, Keith, why would you ask me that? I said, well, Mom, the black kids say I'm a gray boy. I'm a zebra. I'm a mixed boy. I'm a mutt. Mom, am I white? Keith, wait till your dad gets home. My dad comes home from the aerospace job, takes a shower, pours himself a drink, grabs the evening paper. My mom says, Arthur, we need to talk to Keith. So I go up to the master bedroom and I take my seat. They come in, they shut the door behind them, and they proceeded to impart their pearls of wisdom to me on how I got these features and characteristics and attributes from the father, the African American, and how I got the similar features from my mother, the Italian and East Indian. Well, folks, if you ever heard an adult speak in a Charlie Brown episode, womp, womp, womp. That's all I heard. But what happened to me eternally was emotional detachment. At that instant, I was emotionally detached from my biological family. All I saw was differences and very little similarities. And just like water finds its own level, so does a kid who's no longer emotionally attached to his biological family. At that point, the inset of trauma shifted my perspective and would have stayed so for the rest of my life, absent outside forces causing it to be realigned. How that materialized for me are things like childhood obesity, where I was too fat to play football. That's right, guys. Too fat to play football. I would go inside the locker room, I'd get on the scale, and the coaches would say, okay, everyone weigh in. As soon as we got done, they'd pull me aside and say, Keith, I'm sorry, you can't play today. I had to take off my jersey, take off my helmet, take off my shoulder pads, and I'd go out with the rest of the field, and I'd sit on the sideline next to the water boy. That trauma shifted my perspective. I look up in the bleachers, looked at my grandparents, and then have to mouth to them, I can't play today. That feeling that you just want to die, that you don't want to go on to deal with that humiliation, was a daily occurrence during my childhood. By the time I was 16 years old, Philadelphia decided to start this TV show, and I had the privilege of going on that TV show, and I got to be what they coined the term today as a childhood celebrity, and I got to dance and sign autographs and get really famous in a short period of time. And after doing that for 3 years, I segued that skill set into working with other dance companies and honing my skills. And after doing that for another 3 more years, by the time I decided to pursue my dream, I was feeling like I was on the outside of any ability of accomplishing that goal. So I told my mom and dad, I need to get out of here. I need to get to California and make my dreams come true. My dad got the highlighter and routed my route to California, and I got out here in 3 calendar days. I found residence in Hollywood, got my first job at a studio doing security work. And then I realized I didn't come out here for that. I came out here to pursue my dream. So then I asked the supervisor, how did I get to do your job? And he gave me a business card, and I submitted a resume. And I said, you know what, I'm not here to do security work. I need to go do something else. So I changed security jobs, and I'm now working in Beverly Hills on Rodeo Drive at another security company's accounts. And I asked the supervisor there how I get to do his job. He gave me a business card, and by darn, I got hired. I'm now living the life I aspired to live. But you see, the ends did not justify the means. Because I was trying to compensate with outside attainments and fix the devaluation inside. As this went on for 6 more years, I became an executive protection specialist. I'm bodyguarding those who I came out here to work aside in the entertainment industry, except now I'm tasked with the job of protecting their lives. And 6 years I did this vocation. November of '92, I signed the most lucrative contract to date. I was going to get paid more money per week than my mom and dad combined. I signed that contract November 13th, '92, and November 14th, '92, I went to the Roxbury nightclub to celebrate. When I left the nightclub on November 15th at 2 in the morning, I became the causing force in a fatal car accident while under the influence of alcohol. As a result of my consequence, the Los Angeles County District Attorney exercised their discretionary powers and charged me with murder in the 2nd degree. I was left no choice but to stand trial. And if I was convicted, I was going to face a life sentence in California prison. I went to Men's Central Jail, and I said, this can't be happening to me. For you see, I was a Cub Scout, I was a Boy Scout, my mom was a den mother. I went to the U.S. Air Force Civil Air Patrol to pursue my dreams. And here I am, facing a life sentence. So then, 9 months later, in Men's Central Jail, I got convicted in the Superior Court of Los Angeles. The term I was facing was life imprisonment. I got sentenced to level 4, California State Prison, Lancaster, for a term of life. I wrote my mother and father the most scathing letter, absolving them from any complicity into the bed that I was going to lay in for the remainder of my days. Because they had no influence in me making the life choices I made. See, that toxic trauma that I endured as a child was the #1 source that defined every decision I made throughout my childhood, my adolescence, and into my young adulthood. But I did know what I didn't know and couldn't see what I couldn't see. And as a result of that fatal consequence, being the party responsible for that tragic, horrendous occurrence, I now was going to serve the remainder of my days locked in a prison cell. 10 years I fought the conviction. Every single challenge of that conviction was denied. I then had no other recourse but to apply for my release via the California Board of Parole. I appeared without a single disciplinary write-up. Parole was denied. I returned 1 year later, still disciplinary-free, did every form of rehabilitation within the system and out. Parole again was denied. I got on the phone, I called my parents 3,000 miles away, and I said, I have 3 realities facing me. I will attempt to escape, get killed trying. The warden will call and ask how to dispose of my body. 2, I'll attempt to escape. I'll succeed and you'll never hear from me again. Or 3, I'll do this thing called studying the law. They begged me to take that 3rd option, so I did. I studied and mastered life litigation in California, and I became my own attorney. I learned how to shepherdize. I learned how to study the Code of Civil Procedure. I learned how to write pleadings, and I learned how to file in all 3 state courts and then the federal court system as well. And after 5 more years, my legal challenges reached the U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. I got assigned a 3-judge panel, and I was winning the legal argument before the court. But to keep my case from being published and creating what's called a legal watershed, they took me back to the parole board and found me suitable for parole in 2009. 5 months later, they set my file on the then governor's desk, and the attorney general and the governor decided, let that grant of parole stand. 14 months later, after serving 18 years, 3 months and 8 days, in California prison with a life sentence for DUI single fatality, I was released from an institution referred to as Chucky's house because I was serving time with Charles Manson. And I served every single second of my incarceration clean and sober, availed myself to every form of rehabilitation. Because I got down to the causes and conditions of the faulted choices that I made. I saw exactly where trauma that I experienced as a child had its way in my decision-making process. The most profound portion of that survey done by CDC and Kaiser, the ACEs survey, was them saying ACEs are preventable. When I walked out of that institution and I embraced my mother and father, words of the English language are ill-equipped to describe what that felt like for me. But I knew with 18 and a quarter years of unbroken recovery that I had amassed certain tools. And those tools would help me negotiate my path and my second lease in life. The law of the state precludes me from having any contact with the person who was tragically injured in that fatal car accident, with their family, their friends, their community. But I knew in my research and finding out the causation of why this happened, that I could still make amends. So I set the course and set my life compass that every single life I come in contact with, my goal is to make sure their life is better for having crossed paths with me. I started a 501c3 nonprofit. There's 4 projects under that banner: distracted and impaired driving, suicide and depression, bullying and cyberbullying, and cultural, racial, ethnic, and gender sensitivity. As I turn on the TV and turn on the internet and I see the stories cascading across my screen or into my ear, my spirit testifies that every single thing that adversely impacts humanity stems from trauma, bar none. So I try to reach out so another family does not have to answer that phone late in the morning and have another law enforcement official on the end of that phone tell them, "I'm sorry to tell you, but." October 2011, I spoke at a meeting for young people in Venice, California. And a girl came up to me after my presentation with tears streaming down her face and said, "Thank you, Keith, for you saved my life." 8 months later, June the following year, I spoke at another meeting. The girl came up to me and basically said the same thing, except she said she wrote a note before coming to that meeting, was going to leave the meeting, go home, take 2 bottles of Oxycontin and a half-gallon of vodka and end her life that night. Because see, the note she wrote was her suicide note. So I know the pain that these kids are in today, for I was that kid. So I ask everybody to heed this call of action. And that ACEs survey that said 67% suffer from at least one of those ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. Those with more are predisposed towards suicide ideation, acts of violence, or being the victim of violence. Have the courage. Have the courage to do the inventory by yourself or with a loved one and get down to the causes and conditions of your trauma. And if you do not find any trauma in your own life, trust me when I tell you, the person to your left, to your right, in the front, or the rear is experiencing trauma. Hurt people, damage other people, and traumatize people, traumatize other people. But my life has become, and shall remain so, a testimony that if we take the steps and have the courage, we can transform that trauma and make this world a better place. Thanks for letting me share.